The first section we're going to look at in the GUI then is this wave section. And this is where you set up your oscillators, which are these sound generators. And there are 4 of these available. And you can see when I click on the switches here, it switches to displaying and controlling that particular oscillator. And you can see over on the right there, we have individual level dials for each of these oscillators too. So in this particular patch, I can see only oscillators 1 and 2 are in use. Now what we're going to do is initialize this preset, which basically resets all the controls to a default state, which in this case means we've only got oscillator 1, and oscillator 1 is simply a sawtooth waveform. So it's a good initial starting point to work from when you want to create a particular patch. Now each one of these oscillators can be set to a number of different modes. The default mode here you can see is classic. And in each different mode, some of the controls here, particularly control A and B, but also the WT mix dial down here, do different things. Some of the controls are the same though, and let's start off with the tuning. And it's pretty standard tuning controls that you find on all synths. So we have octave up and down, note up and down, which is just individual semitones, and pay attention to the fact that this only goes up to 11 either side, not 12, not the full octave. So yeah, this will not be an octave up. If you want to go an octave up, I'll reset this dial and use the switches here. And then a fine dial for tuning in fractions of a semitone. And once again, you can see actually the cent tuning here doesn't go up to 100, so it doesn't go up to a full semitone either side, but just below, going up to 99. But that's a very small amount of a semitone, so you probably wouldn't actually hear any difference there anyway. And then at the bottom here you have phase. And this sets the point through the waveform at which the oscillator starts. Normally it would start at the beginning at 0 degrees. But if we like, we can increase the dial here and you'll see it changing on the display to start at a different point through the waveform. Now you won't hear any difference in this sound, but maybe we'll find an example of this later on. And on this display, just below the main waveform display, we have a secondary waveform, which at the moment is set to sine wave. And what we can do now in this mode, using the mix dial here, is to blend in some of this waveform into the mix. And you'll hear it works like a crossfader, where our sawtooth waveform is on one side, so set to fully left here, we'll only hear the sawtooth, but then as I rotate it to the right there, we'll blend in more and more of this sine wave until in the other position we only hear the sine wave. And now with it set to fully right, I can choose one of the different waveforms here. And you can see at the top here, we have all the kind of standard waveforms like sine wave, triangle wave, and so on. And then as we scroll down the list, you have lots of different instrument waveforms, which are good starting points when composing patches in a particular style. So going up to the middle here now and checking out control A and B and some of the different oscillator modes to see how these dials change. In the classic mode then, the default one, as I've said, we've got a sawtooth waveform, but you'll hear and see if I rotate control A that it morphs it into a square wave. So separately right here we've got a square wave, as you can see on the display, or of course we can set it in the middle to have a hybrid blend of sawtooth and square waveforms. And then we can even use the mix dial down here to dial in some of the sine wave to create a blend of all 3. Or of course any one of the other waveforms here, like let's say triangle wave. So you can do quite a lot in the default mode just using these 2 dials here to blend some of these classic waveform types. Now let's look at control B. So I'll set it back to a square wave, And you'll see now if I rotate Control B, that what happens is the pulse width, which is the size or the width of one or the other side of this square wave here, becomes narrower. So what's happening there isn't that the whole waveform is shifting one way or the other. It's simply that either the upward or the downward part of the waveform is becoming smaller or narrower, which makes the sound thinner and more nasal, as you can hear. And this is a great control to modulate. In fact, any time you rotate a dial like this and you find it creates an interesting sound, it's often a good idea to make a note of it or remember it, and then use it for a modulation destination later on to create really cool sounds. Only one thing to bear in mind with pulse width, as you can hear though, when it goes to one extreme, the sound completely cuts out. So just something to be careful of if modulating it, to make sure you're aware that the fact if you modulate it all the way to the top, then it might create dropouts.